Before we begin, take a breath. What if a single act of kindness could rebuild a broken life? What if someone who had lost everything found home again, not through fate, but by choosing to stay? If stories like these speak to your soul, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because here we believe in second chances, quiet courage, and the kind of love that grows where the frost once lived. The rain had turned to sleet by the time Noah Carter reached the cabin. His boots crunched against the gravel path, leaving deep, tired impressions behind. Montana's early winter hadn't waited for December this year. The trees stood skeletal against a pale gray sky, their branches stiff with cold. Everything smelled of damp pine and frozen soil. He shifted the weight of the firewood basket against his hip and climbed the creaking porch steps. Above him, the corrugated tin roof beat with sharp, steady drops, a metallic echo that reminded him of the night she'd died. He paused at the door. The wind pulled at his coat collar, but he didn't move. Just for a moment, he stood there and listened. It was a habit he hadn't broken, listening for what wasn't there. No laughter, no voice from the kitchen humming half a tune. Just the hollow hush of being the only soul left in a place once full of life. He stepped forward, reaching for the handle, then stopped. A sound, soft, out of place. Behind him. He turned. A woman stood at the edge of the porch, half in shadow, her arms wrapped around something. No. Someone. A child. Two more hovered close behind her, smaller figures huddled like stray kittens under a threadbare blanket. The woman's coat was soaked through, her hair slicked to her face. Her lips trembled as she met his eyes. I'm sorry, she said quickly, voice hoarse with cold. We just need somewhere dry for a little while. We won't stay long. Please. Noah didn't speak. His hand hovered near the doorknob, but his eyes scanned the children. Soaked, shivering, eyes too wide, too quiet for their age. The littlest one was wheezing faintly, her breath shallow. His gaze caught something else, a bruise, faint yellowing, around the woman's wrist as she adjusted the blanket. They shouldn't be his problem. He didn't invite trouble, not anymore. He looked away. Then he opened the door. Come in, he said quietly and stepped aside. The children moved first, too tired to be afraid. The boy went straight to the fireless hearth and curled up on the rug. The older girl helped the youngest inside, murmuring something Noah couldn't hear. The woman entered last, holding her breath like she wasn't sure she was really welcome. Noah set down the firewood and got the stove going. He didn't look at her as he worked. Flames caught, slowly warming the room with a soft amber glow. There were only 3 chairs. He pulled 2 toward the fire and tossed an old blanket over one. The woman gently lowered the smallest child onto it, removing the wet shoes and wrapping her more tightly. What's your name? He asked, still not facing her. Grace, she said. Grace Miller. He nodded once. Kids? She hesitated. Eli's the oldest, then Ruth, and the little one. That's Hope. The names landed heavier than he expected. Hope. He hadn't said that word aloud in a long time. Noah retrieved a tin of crackers and a jar of honey from the cupboard. Not much, but something. He placed them silently on the table. Grace looked at him with gratitude that wasn't spoken, just etched in the way her shoulders sagged with relief. He sat on the far end of the room, on the edge of the bed that hadn't been shared in over 3 years. From this angle, he could see them clearly. Grace didn't eat. She let the children have the food. Eli broke a cracker in half to give to Ruth, who insisted on sharing hers with Hope. The little girl gave a sleepy smile. They were used to not having enough. He could see it in how slowly they chewed, how they didn't ask for more, how they seemed grateful just to be warm. Grace turned to him. I know this isn't fair, we shouldn't be here, but there wasn't anywhere else. Noah didn't answer right away. He was watching Hope, whose chest rose and fell too rapidly for his comfort. She's sick. Grace nodded. She's been coughing for days. We were supposed to get to Missoula, but the car gave out and we walked the last 2 miles in the rain. Doctor? No papers, no money. She looked down. But I can leave by morning.
You don't need to. You're not leaving tonight, he cut in. His voice was quiet but final. She looked up, startled. You'll all sleep here. There's hot water in the kettle, blankets in that trunk. You'll find enough. He stood
And walked toward the back room, the one he never opened for anyone. At the door, he paused. I don't know what you're running from, but it's cold and it's getting colder. You're safe here for now. And then he closed the door. Inside his room, he sat on the edge of the bed staring at the floorboards. The rain had quieted, but not stopped. Somewhere beyond the walls, a child coughed again, thinner this time. He rubbed his hands together, feeling the rough skin catch at each other. A scar pulled at his knuckle. He'd gotten it the day he built the crib for his daughters, a long time ago. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, and let out a slow breath. Something had shifted tonight. Not broken, but moved. Not much, but enough. Noah was up before dawn. He always was. Old habits didn't die. They just got quieter. The sky outside the cabin was a dim, bruise-colored blue. Snow had begun to fall sometime after midnight, light, almost hesitant. The forest beyond the window stood still, holding its breath. He filled the kettle and set it on the stove, moving quietly so he wouldn't wake anyone. But the moment the water began to hiss, he heard it. Soft footsteps behind him. Grace stood, in the doorway, her frame wrapped in one of the old quilts he'd left out. Her hair was still damp at the ends, and her eyes were heavy with the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. I can make something, she offered, voice low. If you have flour, or eggs, or anything really. Noah didn't turn. There's bread, and jam maybe. He shrugged. Not much of a pantry. She stepped into the kitchen slowly, as if unsure whether she was allowed to cross that invisible line. Still more than we had yesterday. He heard the faint scrape of a chair as she sat, then the soft clatter of ceramic mugs as she poured water into 2 chipped cups. I can help around here, she said after a moment. I don't expect charity. Noah glanced at her. I didn't say it was charity. She blinked, startled, but he didn't elaborate. He took his cup and moved toward the window. The glass was fogged slightly from the warmth inside. Outside, the snow settled gently on the porch railing. He sipped. Too hot. Behind him, Grace exhaled. Eli's a good kid, she said softly. Tries too hard to be a man. Ruth watches everything. And Hope. Her voice caught. Hope hasn't spoken since last spring. Noah turned. Muteness. No. Trauma. She saw. Grace looked away. She saw her father hit me. He broke a plate. She was hiding under the table. After that, she just stopped. Noah felt something cold crawl down his spine. He set his cup down too hard, the sound sharp in the quiet. I'm not asking for sympathy, Grace added quickly. Just time, a few days, until I can figure out what to do. He said nothing. Instead, he walked to the woodpile near the stove and started stacking logs. One by one. Neat. Measured. Like he could build a wall between them out of pine and silence. But her words followed him. Stopped speaking. Hiding. Under the table. He knew what fear looked like. And he'd seen it in Hope's eyes last night. Not fear of this place, but fear that safety was temporary. He'd seen that look before. In his own daughters. After the accident. After they realized their mother wasn't coming back. His hands paused mid-motion. Then quietly he said, You can stay through the weekend. Grace looked up. Thank you. It's not a favor, it's just time. He turned back toward the stove. That's all. She nodded. Time's all I need. Later, that morning the children helped shovel the walkway. Eli took charge, pushing snow like it was his job, eyes narrowed with too much seriousness for a boy his age. Ruth followed, quiet and precise, lining snow into neat walls like a miniature fortress. Hope didn't speak. She just dragged a stick through the powder, tracing shapes only she could understand. Noah watched from the porch, mug in hand, his breath rising in clouds. They didn't belong here. Not really. This cabin wasn't made for more than one man and his ghosts. And yet, there was something about the way Eli stood between his sisters and the cold wind. The same way Noah used to stand behind his wife when strangers came too, close. Something about the way Grace touched each child gently, wordlessly. A presence so careful it broke him a little. At lunch, they sat around the table. Grace had found a box of old soup cans in the pantry and made something warm, if not exactly flavorful. The children laughed softly over a riddle Ruth made up. Even Hope smiled. A tiny thing, fleeting as frost on glass. Noah pretended not to notice. But his chest ached in a way it hadn't in years. That night, after the children were asleep, Noah found himself in the workshop behind the cabin, a space he hadn't entered in months. Dust lay thick on every surface. Tools sat where they'd last been touched, abandoned mid-project as if their owner had planned to return and simply never did. In the corner sat a wooden bench, half-carved, the joints rough and unfinished. He ran his hand along the edge, the grain smooth where he'd once cared. His late wife had asked him to make it. A reading bench for the girls. He'd started it 3 days before the accident. After that, he never came back, until now. The wood was cold under his palm, but not dead. Still solid, still waiting. Like something, someone, he'd left behind. He stood there a long time. Then, slowly, he picked up the chisel. The days passed in a kind of quiet rhythm, soft and unfamiliar. Outside, the snow deepened. Inside, the cabin breathed again. Noah noticed it first in the air. Warmer in the mornings, scented faintly with cinnamon from Grace's tea, or wood smoke that lingered even after the fire had died. It wasn't just temperature. It was something else, presence. The children had their own rhythms. Eli insisted on chopping kindling, mimicking Noah's movements with a determination that bordered on stubbornness. Ruth had a habit of organizing things, buttons, forks, pebbles, into neat little rows on the windowsill. And Hope, though still silent, had started drawing in the frost on the windows. Trees, stars, sometimes a hand reaching out to another. Noah didn't ask questions. He wasn't good at asking, but he watched. And when he watched long enough, the stillness inside him began to stir. Grace moved through the cabin with quiet grace, as though afraid to take up space. She rose early to fold blankets, cleaned without being asked, and always served food to the children before taking any herself. He noticed the way she touched Hope's hair when the little girl coughed, or how her eyes never left Eli when he carried the axe, worry stitched into every breath she took. Noah wasn't used to this kind of attentiveness. It unnerved him, but it also softened him. On the fourth morning, the stove gave out. The pipe was clogged with soot and the fire refused to catch. Noah cursed under his breath, kneeling in the ashes, hands blackened with effort. "I can help," Grace said from the doorway, sleeves rolled up. Noah glanced up, surprised. "You know stoves?" "I grew up on a farm. My father didn't believe in plumbers." She crossed the room, knelt beside him, and together they dismantled the pipe, coughing through clouds of soot. It was messy, ridiculous work. And when Grace sneezed a cloud of black, both of them laughed. It startled them, the laughter. Neither had done it in a long time. Noah handed her a rag to wipe her face. Their hands brushed. Just that, but enough to make him withdraw a little too fast. Grace noticed. She didn't comment, just smiled, gently, and turned back to work. Later, that day the children asked to decorate the cabin. Christmas was coming. There wasn't much to use, a few old ribbons, a cracked box of ornaments, paper scraps. But they made do. Ruth folded stars out of newspaper. Eli dragged in a bent pine branch from the forest edge. Hope, silent and solemn, placed each ornament with precise care. Noah watched from the doorway, a mug of tea cooling in his hand. Grace stood nearby, arms crossed, watching her children with a kind of wonder, like they'd survived more than just a storm. "You've got good kids," Noah said softly. Grace turned, a little startled. "Thank you." "They listen. They're strong." Her smile faded slightly. "They had to be." He nodded, then added almost grudgingly, "You're doing a good job." Grace blinked. "Coming from you, that means more than you know." They stood like that for a moment, not touching, not saying anything more. But something between them had shifted. That night they shared a meal, real food, not just cans and crackers. Grace had somehow coaxed a stew out of a bag of lentils, potatoes and dried herbs Noah didn't remember owning. The children devoured it like a feast. Noah ate slowly, his mind chewing more than his mouth. The table felt fuller than it had in years. After dinner, Ruth climbed into his lap without asking, showing him a drawing she'd made. It was the cabin, crudely sketched, but with smoke curling from the chimney and 5 stick figures standing in front. One was clearly him, tall with square shoulders and a funny line for a beard. Noah stared at it, unsure what to say. Grace spoke softly from across the room. "She only draws people she trusts." He looked at Ruth. Her head had fallen against his chest, already asleep. He didn't move for a long time. Later, when everyone was asleep, Noah returned to the workshop. The bench still waited, its edges rough, unfinished. But something had changed. He picked up the plane and smoothed another inch of wood. Not because he had to. Not for her, but because the cabin had 5 people now, and it needed places to sit. Noah hadn't meant to show her the bench. It happened the way some things do, without plan, without thought. Just 2 people standing in a space too small to carry all the silence between them. He had been sanding the edges late in the afternoon, the winter light slanting through the dusty window. The smell of pine and old varnish hung in the air. The grain under his fingers felt smoother now, worn down by time, effort, and something more than either. Grace had knocked once on the doorframe before stepping into the workshop. She held a jar of tea, warm between her hands. "I thought, you might need this," she said. He looked up, saw the shadow of snowflakes melting on her coat, the steam rising from the mug, the cautious hope in her eyes. "I didn't know you still used this room," she added. "I don't," he said, then paused. "Didn't." She walked in slowly, eyes scanning the tools, the dust, the photos still tacked on the walls, faded pictures of twin girls holding toy hammers, a woman with laughter lines around her mouth. Grace's gaze lingered there. "She was beautiful," she said gently. Noah didn't answer. He didn't need to. Grace set the tea down on a workbench and stepped closer to the bench he was sanding. She ran her hand lightly along the side. "For your daughters?" He nodded. "Started it the week before the accident." Her hand froze. He didn't look at her, just kept sanding. The motion steady, safe. She was driving them home. "From school," he said, voice low. "Black ice. They said it was fast. Said she wouldn't have felt anything." Grace stayed quiet. "I told her I'd fix the brakes. I'd been meaning to for weeks. Got distracted. Work. Life. You think you have time?" His hand stopped. He stared at the wood, at the scar that had never sanded out. "When the sheriff told me, I thought he had the wrong house. Then I saw the car. Silence. The kind that fills your lungs like smoke." Grace's voice came soft but steady. "You don't have to carry that alone." "I do," he said. "I've earned it. No one earns grief like that." He finally turned toward her, and for the first time in days she saw it. Not the quiet, capable man who chopped wood and made tea and fixed broken stoves, but the man beneath it all. The man who had once held a whole world in his arms and watched it fall apart in the rearview mirror of a state trooper's car. She reached out, slowly, and placed her hand over his. He didn't pull away. That night, the wind howled harder than usual. Snow slammed against the windows and the trees groaned under the weight of ice. Noah sat by the fire, the room dim except for the soft orange glow. Grace sat across from him wrapped in a quilt, her eyes following the flames. The children had gone to bed early. The house was quiet, that rare, heavy quiet that only came when both past and present held their breath. "Do you miss her every day?" Grace asked, her voice almost a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "I used to think I'd forget her. Eventually. That it was the only way to move on." He looked at the fire. "But it doesn't work like that. She's still here. Not in some spiritual sense, just in the way I make coffee, the songs I skip on the radio, the drawer I never open." Grace nodded. "I still flinch when someone slams a door." Noah looked at her. "My ex," she said. "He didn't start out cruel. That's the worst part. He started out gentle, patient. He held my hand through my mother's funeral. He made pancakes on Sundays." She gave a small broken laugh. "Then one day something cracked, and I kept thinking it was just once. Just a bad day. Then it became routine. I stayed for the kids. I told myself they were too young to notice." Her voice trembled, but they noticed. Noah leaned forward. "How long?" 4 years. She swallowed. "The last straw was when Eli jumped between us, took a hit meant for me." Noah clenched his jaw. He felt the heat rise in his chest, not from the fire, from something deeper, something primal. Protective. "Didn't know where to go," she added. "So I kept driving, landed here." She looked up at him, eyes glassy. "I didn't expect to find this." "This?" he asked. "Peace. Or a man who doesn't ask for anything but still gives quietly." He looked away. The words were too much, too close. Then he whispered, almost to himself, "I thought I couldn't love again." Grace tilted her head. "Do you still think that?" Noah didn't reply. But in the stillness between them, something unspoken settled. Not a promise. Not yet. But the weight of two broken hearts leaning just enough to share warmth. In the hallway that night, as he checked on the girls, he saw Hope sleeping with Ruth's hand wrapped around hers. In the moonlight, he saw something drawn on Hope's wrist in crayon. A small heart. Noah stood there longer than he meant to. One hand on the doorframe. Then, without a sound, he stepped back, closed the door gently and whispered, "Good night, little ones." The first snowfall, thick enough to silence the woods, came 3 days before Christmas. It fell in soft waves, blanketing the cabin roof, the trees, the old truck Noah hadn't started since October. Outside, the world looked clean again, untouched, and soundless, like someone had hit pause on everything that hurt. Inside, the warmth came not just from the fire, but from the way the space was lived in now. There were boots by the door, mittens drying near the stove, paper snowflakes taped unevenly to the windows. Noah had never liked holidays since the accident. They arrived like ghosts, full of memories, of things not said, of gifts that would never be opened. But this year the ghosts didn't walk in uninvited. They waited at the edge of the woods, watching, because someone else had stepped in first. Grace. And her children, whose laughter now drifted like music through the cabin. Halls on Christmas Eve, Eli asked if they could do something special. He didn't say it with the eager grin of a boy expecting presents. He said it like someone afraid to hope. "We don't have decorations," Noah warned. Grace smiled from the stove, stirring something that smelled faintly of cloves. "We have hands. We'll make some." That night the cabin transformed. Ruth folded stars from old newspaper. Hope placed pine cones on the mantel. Eli helped Noah string popcorn on thread, the boy's fingers clumsy, but determined. Noah hadn't laughed like that in years. Not at the popcorn falling apart, not at Grace playfully scolding Eli for stealing kernels, not even when Hope tucked a strand behind her ear and nodded solemnly at her perfectly placed star. But he laughed now, and it didn't feel like betrayal. Dinner was humble, soup, bread, a pie Grace somehow conjured from apples going soft. But it was warm. It was enough, and it was shared. Afterward, the children curled near the fire, wrapped in quilts. Grace lit a single candle in the center of the table. "I always light one," she said softly, "for what we lost and what we're finding." Noah stared at the flame, small, still, steady. He felt it burn behind his ribs. Later, when the children were asleep, Grace stood near the bench Noah had been working on. It now sat inside the cabin, sanded smooth, polished with care, as if it had always belonged. "It's beautiful," she whispered. He joined her, his eyes tracing the curve of the wood. "It was for my daughters. I started it then. Never finished." "But you did now," she said. "I wasn't sure I could." She turned toward him. "Why did you?" He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Because they needed somewhere to sit." Grace didn't speak. She just stepped closer, her hand brushing the top of the bench. Her fingers stilled over a spot near the edge, a place where, faintly, initials had been carved. 2 tiny letters, L and E. "Lily and Ella," Noah said, answering her unasked question. Grace's voice barely carried. "You don't say their names often, do you?" "No." "Why not?" "Because if I say them too loud, I'm afraid I'll hear nothing back." Silence stretched between them, wrapped in firelight. Then Grace took his hand. Not as a question, not as a promise, but as a moment, shared, a bridge between past and present. "I don't know what we're building here," she said. "Neither do I. But it feels real." Noah nodded. "Real enough to stay a little longer?" He looked into her eyes, and for the first time, didn't flinch at what he saw there. "Yes," he said, "a little longer." That night, he didn't return to his room immediately. He stood by the children's doorway, listening to their breathing, the slow hush of a safe sleep. Hope stirred once, murmuring something he couldn't catch. When he turned to go, he found Grace standing behind him, blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "I can't sleep," she whispered. "Me neither." They sat on the couch together, the candle still burning on the table nearby. No words, no touch, just presence, and the soft crackle of fire, like a heart, remembering how to beat. In the morning, Ruth squealed at the sight of stockings on the chairs, mismatched socks Noah had filled with oranges and peppermints during a late trip to the shed. Eli found a carved whistle, a quick project Noah had finished past midnight. Grace found a scarf, soft and hand-knitted, the label still intact from years ago. Noah had never given it to anyone. Hope found a note. Just one line, written in shaky but careful penmanship. "Your voice is still there, when you're ready." Tears welled in Grace's eyes when she read it aloud. Hope didn't speak, but she smiled. Then slowly she walked across the room and hugged Noah around the waist. He froze, then lowered his hand gently onto her back. The hug stayed, longer than expected, warmer than he thought he could take. And when it ended, something inside him, something once locked in frost, cracked, letting light in. The knock came just after noon. It wasn't a polite knock. It was the kind that didn't wait, sharp, hollow, demanding. Noah had just set down a box of tools when it echoed through the cabin. The children looked up from their board game. Grace froze mid-stir at the stove, the ladle trembling in her grip. Noah moved first, slow but steady. He reached the door, looked through the warped glass and felt every muscle in his back tighten. A man stood on the porch, tall, broad-shouldered, dark beard streaked with gray. His coat was expensive, his boots clean. But the eyes, they were anything but civilized. Noah opened the door halfway, just enough for the cold to slip in. "Can I help you?" he asked. The man's voice was smooth, practiced. "I'm looking for Grace Miller. She's my wife." Behind Noah, he heard a sharp inhale, Then a whisper, almost too faint to catch. "Noah, don't let him in." Noah didn't move. The man's eyes narrowed. "She's got my kids. I have a legal right." Noah's jaw clenched. "This isn't a courtroom and you're not welcome here. I just want to talk to her." "She doesn't want to talk to you." There was a pause, a subtle shift in weight, a storm behind still eyes. "You think you're protecting her?" The man sneered. "You don't know her. You don't know anything about us." Noah stepped fully into the doorway now. Tall, unflinching. His voice came calm, but iron hard. "I know enough. I know she's scared of you. I know those kids are terrified when they hear a door slam. And I know she didn't come here to be found." The man took one step forward. Noah didn't move an inch. "Turn around," he said. "This is your only chance." For a moment, just a moment, Noah saw it. The hesitation, the knowledge that behind him, a battered woman and 3 small children were listening to every word. Then the man spat on the porch, muttered something vile under his breath, and turned. He walked back to his SUV, tires crunching over snow and gravel, then gunned the engine and drove off into the woods. But Noah knew. This wasn't over. Inside, Grace was shaking. Her knuckles had gone white around the edge of the kitchen counter. Her lips pressed together like a dam holding back something too heavy. Noah closed the door and turned toward her. "He won't be back today," he said. But Grace didn't respond. Instead, she walked past him, fast, and into the bedroom, shutting the door. He didn't follow. Instead, he turned to Eli, who was standing in front of his sisters, fists clenched, too small to be so ready to fight. "You okay?" Noah asked gently. Eli nodded, but didn't speak. Noah crouched beside him, rested a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to protect anyone right now," he said. "That's my job." The boy's lower lip trembled. But he didn't cry. He just nodded again, and slowly exhaled. Hours passed. The children napped. The snow fell. Noah stood on the porch watching the road. He'd taken his old shotgun down from the wall, not loaded, just near, just in case. When the sun began to dip, Grace finally emerged. Her face was pale but composed. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" "For bringing this here." Noah shook his head. "You didn't bring it?" He followed. "That's different." Grace stepped outside beside him. The cold caught her breath, turned it into mist. "I thought I could outrun him. I thought maybe if I didn't ask for anything, if I just disappeared, he'd let go." Noah didn't speak. She looked down at her hands. "I don't want to run anymore." He looked at her now, fully. "Then don't." A silence settled, deeper than the snow. Grace swallowed. "If you tell us to leave, I understand." He didn't answer at first, then, "You're not leaving." She looked up. "Why?" Noah's voice was low, steady. "Because if someone comes to my door scared and tired and trying to do the right thing, I don't turn them away, not anymore." Grace blinked. Her voice trembled. "Why not?" His eyes didn't waver. "Because once, someone needed help, and I hesitated. I won't make that mistake again." That night the cabin was quiet, but not from fear. The fire burned strong, the curtains were drawn, and for the first time in a long time, Grace allowed herself to sit beside someone without flinching at every creak of the floorboards. They didn't speak much, but when he handed her a mug of tea and their fingers touched, she didn't pull away. She held his gaze and said softly, "Thank you." Noah looked at her for a long moment, then said, "You don't owe me thanks." A pause. "Maybe not," she whispered. "But I'm giving it anyway." Later, as he stood by the bedroom door listening to the sound of the children breathing, Noah felt something shift again. Not like a storm, not like a crash, but like a door, once stuck, now moving on old rusted hinges, opening, and behind, it the chance perhaps to build something that could last. The fire started just after midnight. Noah was the first to wake. Not to smoke, not to sirens, but to silence. A wrong kind of silence. Heavy. Hollow. Like the cabin had stopped breathing. Then he smelled it. Burning pine. He sprang from bed, heart hammering, and flung open the door to the main room. The glow came from outside, flickering orange light, through the front windows. Grace was already up, holding Hope, her face pale as snow. Ruth stood frozen beside her. Eli was trying to pull on his boots with trembling hands. Noah's voice cut through the panic. "Everyone out. Now!" He grabbed coats, blankets, shoved them toward Grace. "Wrap them up. Don't wait." She didn't ask questions, just obeyed. Noah pushed open the front door and was met by smoke, thick, low, curling along the porch, like a living thing. The woodpile was ablaze, flames licking toward the outer wall of the cabin. His chest seized. The cabin was dry, old. If the fire reached the back wall, there was no time to think. He grabbed a shovel and began throwing snow, cursing each delay, each burst of embers that leapt like sparks from hell. But it wasn't enough. The flames had found the siding. They climbed. Noah turned back toward the door. "Get to the truck," he shouted. "Keys are inside." Grace grabbed the children and bolted into the snow. Noah followed, just long enough to see them pile in safely. Then he turned back. Because something was missing. Hope. The next minutes blurred. Ruth screamed. "She's not here. Hope's gone." Panic crashed into Noah like a wave. He spun, scanned the darkness. The fire crackled behind him. Snow fell hard, melting as it touched his skin. The woods loomed, dark, bottomless. She must have wandered out before anyone noticed. Maybe scared, maybe sleepwalking, maybe just searching. Noah didn't hesitate. He tore into the woods. The snow was knee-deep, wind slapping branches into his face. He called her name again and again, lungs burning, eyes wide, frantic. No footprints. The storm had covered everything. Then, a sound, faint, a cough. He turned sharply, cutting through brush until he found a small dip near the creek, shielded by a fallen log. There she was, huddled beneath it, arms over her head, shivering violently. Her lips blue, her eyes wide with terror. "Hope," he gasped, dropping to his knees. "It's okay. I'm here." She didn't speak. But when he reached for her, she didn't pull away. He scooped her up, wrapped her in his coat, cradling her, close to his chest. "We're going home," he whispered. "You're safe. You're safe." The way back was a blur of pain. His legs barely moved. Snow weighted every step. His arms ached from holding her. His heart thudded in his ears louder than the wind. But he kept going, because this time, he would not be too late. When he reached the truck, Grace ran toward him, sobbing. Eli opened the door. Ruth screamed, "Daddy!" And for the first time, Noah didn't flinch at the word. They wrapped Hope in every blanket they had, placed her between Grace and Ruth. She clung to Grace, but her hand reached back, searching. Noah took it. She squeezed once, weak but steady. And in the rearview mirror, he saw it. The cabin. The flames had spread to the roof. The porch was gone. The place he'd once called his last refuge, now a silhouette against fire and falling snow. Noah didn't look away. He didn't cry. Not yet. They drove through the night. The road was slick, but empty. The storm thinned as they reached town. Sheriff Dawes met them in front of the station, eyes wide as he saw the soot on Noah's face, the girl wrapped in a quilt in Grace's arms. "What happened?" he asked. Noah's voice was hoarse. "He came back." The sheriff didn't ask. "Who?" He just nodded grimly. "We'll find him." But Noah wasn't thinking about justice. He was thinking about the weight in his arms, the fear in Grace's eyes, the drawing on Hope's wrist, a small, simple heart. At the clinic, the doctor said Hope would be okay. Mild hypothermia. No smoke. Inhalation. She'd be weak for a few days. She's lucky, he said. Noah didn't reply. He only looked at Grace. No, she whispered, tears spilling. We're all lucky. They stayed that night in a church guest room. Small, bare, but warm. Noah sat on the floor beside Hope's cot, watching her sleep. Grace sat nearby, knees pulled to her chest, the flicker of the nightlight painting shadows on her cheek. You didn't have to go back, she said. He looked at her. Yes, I did. I wouldn't have blamed you if you hadn't, but I would have. Grace swallowed. You could have died. I was more afraid of living with myself if I didn't find her. She reached out, touched his wrist. You saved her. He looked down at their hands. Her skin was soft. His was blistered from the cold. I couldn't save my wife, he whispered, but I saved her. Grace didn't let go. Neither did he. Later, when the lights were off and the room quiet, Hope stirred. Noah leaned closer, and then, in a voice as soft as snowfall, she whispered one word. Daddy. Noah froze. Grace's hand found his. His eyes burned, but he didn't look away. He only whispered back, I'm here. Morning came slow. The church windows held the cold light like stained porcelain. Noah sat upright in the stiff wooden chair beside Hope's cot, arms folded across his chest, chin to shoulder, half asleep. She was breathing steady now. Small puffs of air rose and fell beneath the quilt. Her hand still held his finger, even in sleep like a tether between two broken things. Grace returned with 2 cups of coffee. Her coat was damp from the frost outside, cheeks pink with wind. She didn't stir? She asked. Noah shook his head. Not once. She must have felt safe. That word settled over them like snowfall. Safe. Something Noah hadn't felt in years. Not really. Not since that last phone call. Not since the headlights on the ice. Later that morning, Sheriff Dawes drove them back to the cabin, or what was left of it. The road was still icy, the trees lined with pale frost. But the sun had come out, and ironic really, how light always showed up too late. The cabin was gone, nothing but black beams, a twisted iron stove, scorched foundation, and snow that melted around the ash like it didn't want to get too close. Grace gasped, covering her mouth. Ruth wept quietly. Eli's jaw tightened, hands in fists. Hope simply stared, unmoving from the warmth of the back seat. Noah stepped out first. The air still smelled faintly of smoke. He walked through what used to be the front door. Charred boards snapped beneath his boots. He passed where the table had been. The corner where Grace hung the children's coats. The place where he used to sit by the fire. Alone. It was all gone. And yet something remained. A shape, half buried in snow and soot, burnt but intact. The bench. The one he had carved. He knelt beside it, brushing away flakes of ash, fingertips raw against the rough wood. The initials were still there, L&E, somehow untouched. It undid him. No tears came, just a silence so deep it felt like breaking. Sheriff Dawes spoke from behind. We'll find him, Noah. I give you my word. Noah didn't answer. Because justice wasn't the question. The real question was, what do you do when you have nothing left again? Do you run, or do you rebuild? They moved into an empty rental on the edge of town. Small, beige, forgettable. It smelled like linoleum and dust, but it had heat, beds, doors that locked. The children settled faster than expected. Grace made it feel like home by day 3, a borrowed rug here, a potted plant she found on sale. a picture drawn by Ruth taped to the fridge. But Noah didn't quite know where to be. He spent his days helping around town, fixing fences, hauling firewood, silent but present. Each night he returned to the quiet apartment, to the folding chair in the corner, to the smell of something cooking that wasn't just for him. One evening, Grace sat beside him on the porch steps. "You haven't said much," she said. "I've said enough," she smiled softly. "I meant about staying." He looked at her. "I thought I might leave. Thought maybe that cabin burning down was a sign, time to disappear." And now, he looked at the kids inside, at the faint laughter through the window, at hope drawing hearts in fog on the glass. "I'm tired of signs," he said. "I'm ready to choose." She nodded. "I don't want this to be temporary, Grace." She was quiet for a long time. Then, "Neither do I." The next morning he returned to the remains of the cabin with a shovel and a plan, not to reclaim what was lost, but to clear space for something new. He worked alone at first, tearing down what was unstable, salvaging what little had survived. He found bits of crockery, a bent spoon, a photo frame charred black around the edges. Then one by one, people started showing up. First was Sheriff Dawes bringing tools, then Maria, the baker, with gloves and coffee. Old Hank from the hardware store rolled up with a truckload of boards. "Word got out," Grace explained, standing beside him, cheeks damp. "They remember the man who helped fix their barn, the man who never asked for thanks." Noah looked at the crowd forming. "I didn't ask for this, you didn't have to." By the end of the week, the foundation was cleared. New beams stood upright. Walls took shape. Windows were framed by laughter and wood dust and the scent of cider someone had brewed by the fire pit. The town didn't just help him rebuild a house. They helped him reclaim a life. And he let them. That Friday evening, as the sun bled gold over the new porch, Noah brought out the bench, soot-streaked, scorched, but still whole. He set it down, hands firm. Then he knelt with a carving knife. Slowly, carefully, he scratched a new set of letters beneath the first G. E or H. Grace. Eli Ruth Hope. He didn't say a word, but when Grace came beside him, placed her hand over the carving, and leaned her head against his shoulder, he knew. This wasn't about what had been lost. It was about who had stayed and what they were choosing, together, to rebuild. By the second week of January, the new cabin stood taller than the E. Old one ever had. The roof wasn't finished yet, and the siding was still bare wood, but it had shape, presence, a beginning. Noah stood at the edge of the clearing, gloves in hand, boots caked in mud and sawdust. His back ached, his hands blistered, but his chest felt light. Behind him, the village was moving, and he wasn't just watching this time. He was a part of it. It had started with a message on the bulletin board at Daisy's diner. Rebuilding, the Carter cabin. Help needed, all welcome. He hadn't written it. Sheriff Dawes had, but the townsfolk came anyway. Old Hank brought lumber scraps. Maria sent cinnamon rolls and hot cider every morning, refusing to take payment. Teenagers from the high school shoveled snow and hammered siding like it was summer camp. Even Mr. Brody, who hadn't spoken to Noah since his wife's funeral, showed up with a box of tools and a quiet nod. No one asked what happened. No one judged. They just built. Together. Noah spent most mornings working beside Eli. The boy no longer tried to act older than his years. He worked because he wanted to, not because he had to. There was pride in his swing, steadiness in his stance. Noah taught him how to level a post, how to reinforce a joist, how to listen to the wood before cutting. Grace watched from the kitchen window of their temporary home, always with a soft smile. Sometimes she came by with sandwiches, her cheeks pink from the cold, her laughter carrying across the snow like a song. Sometimes she stayed, and those were Noah's favorite days. One afternoon, as the sun filtered gold through bare branches, Ruth ran into the clearing, waving something in her mittened hands. "Uncle, Joe brought a swing," she shouted. "From his barn? Eli added, grinning. Hope said nothing, but she pointed toward the tree Noah had marked weeks ago, the one he'd promised to hang something from someday. And so they did. A rope swing, simple but strong, tied to a maple whose branches had seen too many winters to care. Hope sat first. Her feet kicked snow into the air, laughter spilling from her lips like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Grace gasped. It was the first time any of them had heard it. Noah turned, stunned, and then he smiled. The next morning, Grace handed him a small box. What's this? He asked. Open it. Inside, a ring, wooden, carved, smooth but imperfect. I made it, she said, from the scraps of the bench. He stared at her, words stuck behind his ribs. I'm not asking, she added quickly. Not yet. Not everything. She stepped closer. I just wanted to give you something to hold when you forget you're allowed to be happy. Noah didn't cry, but his hand closed around the ring like it was the only thing left keeping him steady. The new cabin came together faster than anyone expected. By February, the inside smelled like fresh pine and sawdust again. The kitchen was small but bright. The living room had a hearth rebuilt from old stones, and above it the same mantel Noah had salvaged from the ashes, sanded down to a soft, worn shine. He placed the old bench beneath the window. Ruth painted flowers on the legs. Hope added, hearts L and E still marked one end, G, E, R, H, now curved beside it, not replacing, just continuing. On the first Sunday of March, the town gathered for a housewarming. No invitations sent, no speeches made, just people, plates of food, children playing tag in the field behind the barn. Sheriff Dawes pulled Noah aside near the porch. You did good, Carter, he said. Real good. Noah shook his head. I didn't do it alone. The sheriff smiled. That's the point. Later that afternoon, Grace stood beside the new kitchen window, watching the children run through melting snow, coats flapping, cheeks flushed with joy. Noah came up behind her. Still feel temporary? He asked softly. She shook her head. No. This feels earned. He slipped the wooden ring onto her finger. Not a proposal. Not a promise. Just a symbol. Of choice. Of staying. As dusk fell, the last of the guests drifted away, headlights disappearing into the trees. The fire burned low in the hearth. The children were asleep on the rug, curled up like kittens. Grace poured 2 mugs of tea and sat beside him on the bench. They listened, to the creak of new wood, to the wind brushing against the windows, to the sound of peace. Noah looked around the room, at the photos now framed again, at the swing outside, visible through the curtain, at Grace, warm beside him, at the home they had built, not just with nails and boards, but with people. You know what this place is? He asked. She looked at him. It's not just a cabin. He gestured to the rafters, the walls, the floor beneath their feet. It's proof. Proof of what? She whispered. That we weren't meant to be alone. Spring came late to Stillwater, but it came gently. The last frost melted slow and quiet like someone pulling back a heavy quilt. The trees budded in soft greens. Robins returned to nest above the porch, and in the early light of morning, steam rose from the earth as if the land itself were exhaling after a long, hard winter. Noah stood at the edge of the clearing, hands deep in his jacket pockets, staring at the spot where the old cabin had once stood. There now was a garden. Nothing fancy. Just a row of early lettuce, some sprouting herbs, a few hopeful tomato vines protected under a sheet of tarp. Beside it, a sapling, a red maple, small, fragile-looking, its young leaves trembling in the breeze. Grace called it the promise tree. Noah had dug the hole himself. Eli had lowered the sapling in with both hands. Ruth tied the ribbon. Hope pressed the dirt down with careful palms, then stood silently, watching it like she could see years into the future. Noah hadn't said much that day. He never did, when something mattered too much. That afternoon, he sat on the front steps of the new cabin, sanding a small block of wood. The girls were inside drawing on the kitchen floor. Eli was building a birdhouse with Hank in the barn. Grace was upstairs folding laundry and humming under her breath. It was the kind of ordinary day Noah once thought he'd never know again. He ran the sandpaper over the grain, slow, steady. The shape was coming together, a tiny boat. Something for Hope to float in the creek behind the house. Something small, but real. He was still learning how to give in small, real ways. Grace came outside just as the sun dipped low behind the trees. She carried 2 cups of coffee and a folded blanket. Her hair was pulled back, a few wisps falling across her cheek. "You've been quiet," she said, handing him a cup. "I'm thinking," he replied. "Dangerous," she teased, and sat beside him. They watched the children through the window, heads bent over paper, laughter like music, home in every sense of the word. "You miss them?" she asked softly. He didn't have to ask who she meant. "Every day," he said. "But not like before. Now it's different." "How?" "Used to think missing them was the only way to honor them. Like if I stopped hurting, I'd be letting them go." He paused. "But I think they'd rather I remember them with joy, with something built, not just mourned." Grace reached for his hand. Their fingers laced together naturally now, without hesitation. "I think they'd be proud," she whispered. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Noah stepped into the workshop. The bench was there, same as always, a little more worn, a little more loved. But tonight he brought something new, a wooden plaque. He hung it on the wall, just above the tool rack. Carved into it were the words, "We choose each other, every single day." He stood back and stared at it for a long time. Then he turned off the light and left the room in soft darkness. In the morning, the sky was pale gold. The world smelled of earth and smoke and spring. Grace came out to find Noah in the garden, crouched beside the maple sapling. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting there watching it sway. She walked over quietly, wrapped her arms around his shoulders from behind. He leaned back into her. "She's growing," he said. "She is," Grace answered. He looked up at her. "So, are we?" she smiled. "What should we do today?" Noah looked around, at the porch, the trees, the hill behind the house that needed clearing, the bench that still needed staining, the swing rope fraying ever so slightly. "Plenty we could do," he said. "But," he turned to her fully now, "but I want to stay here a little longer, just like this." She nodded, kneeling beside him. Together they sat in silence, the sapling between them, the wind moving gently through its leaves. Hope joined them minutes later, barefoot, still in pajamas, clutching her sketch pad. She sat, without a word, and handed Noah a page. It was a drawing. Their family. 5 figures beneath a tree. A cabin. A sun. And in the corner, 2 smaller figures drawn in light, fading strokes, a woman and 2 little girls smiling. Noah stared at it, his throat tightening. He didn't ask how she knew. He didn't have to. That evening, as the sun sank behind the mountains, the family sat on the front porch together. Grace curled beneath Noah's arm, the children sprawled around them, the dog snoring at their feet. The stars blinked out slowly. One, then another, then thousands. Hope pointed up, whispering something only Grace could hear. Noah watched the sky, not looking for signs, just grateful. And in the soft hush of night, with the breeze rustling the new leaves of the promise tree, Noah Carter, once broken, once buried in ash and silence, leaned into the quiet and stayed. Not because he had to, not because he'd made a vow, but because he chose it, just like he'd choose again tomorrow, and the day after that, and every day after. "We don't promise forever," he once said, "but we choose each other, every single day. If this story touched your heart, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel. Here, every story is a quiet reminder that even after the coldest winters, something beautiful can still grow. Thank you for staying until the very end. We hope to see you again in another moment of warmth.